With podcasting becoming even more relevant to the community, conversation, and growth in 2024, many brands are jumping into the scene. And these days, podcasting is done face to face. Whether you're streaming the conversation live for your audience to engage with, or you're recording it off air, being in the same virtual space with your guest can really change the game for your episodes. And today, we are talking to a professional podcaster to find out how you can jump into the podcasting scene in 2024. George, how are you today?
I am doing great, KM. How are you? It's great to see you
I'm
again.
good. I'm so excited that you're here. I've been on your podcast many times. I've seen a
Yes, you
lot of the
have.
behind the scenes of what you've done, and I'm
hmm
so excited for you to speak into what our viewers are learning to do today. So, tell me a little bit about you, who you are, and your podcasting experience.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is George Sirois. I am an author of young adult science fiction and also a podcaster since, I would say, since 2016. I did some podcasting back in, I want to say, 2008, 2009 for a period of time. And then I got back into it in 2016 as part of an author's roundtable called Right Pack Radio. And it was such a good time that I decided to jump into my own solo podcast, which is Excelsior Journeys. I started it in October of 2018, and I am closing in on 260 episodes. I've been doing it for 5 years, and it's been one of the most fulfilling things I've ever done. And it's been so much fun that I've started up a sister podcast back in 2021, and earlier last year. I almost said earlier this year, but in March of 2023, I co-founded the Once Upon a Podcast Network with authors Stacey Rourke and Sandra Shear-Zackerley. We have almost 10 shows now, and we are opening the doors to even more. So it's a really creatively fulfilling time, and I couldn't have gotten anywhere near where I am right now without podcasting. So I owe that format so much.
And you've done so much for your communities through your podcast. You've spent so much time and effort gathering incredible guests, having really good conversations, and educating in this space. So I have to ask, we talked a little bit about how you first got into this, but really,
Mhm.
what was your core motivation for jumping in and starting your very first podcast?
It really came down to my Facebook friends. It was looking at my list of Facebook friends and seeing all these different people that I have listed there. And they're people that I knew from grade school, from high school, from college, from after college, people that I just know virtually, people that I know that I got to meet through conventions and conferences like yourself.
Yeah.
And it's been just like a constant, the main constant of it is having creative people around me, and in whatever way. If it's not authors, it's filmmakers, or it's other podcasters, or it's artists, or it's stand-up comics, or it's screenwriters, or just everything. It's a wonderful array of people. It's dancers, it's
Mhm.
voiceover artists, it's sports announcers, and and it's just a wonderful collage of all of this great creativity. And I remember saying, just going through that, I was just like, wow, these are all people that are on their own journey. And yeah, a lot of them have their own full-time jobs, but
Yeah.
they're making their creative outlets work for them. And they need to be celebrated. They need people to know who they are. They need to be on a podcast. And that was my original thought of just like, okay, I'm going to help get these people on all these different shows. And then after a few months, it was just like, okay, they're going to be on my podcast. And that's when I just kind of pivoted and decided I was going to be their own Jimmy Fallon, if you will, and give them an outlet to kind of share their story. And the beautiful thing about podcasting is that you don't have to subscribe to the Tonight Show format where you give them 10 minutes to tell a funny story and show a clip of what they're currently doing, and then that's it. Then move on to the next guest. The great thing about podcasting, you can let the conversation kind of dictate itself
Yeah.
as you go. And so like it's no secret that that when you were on, those episodes would average about an hour or so, because you have such a
We chat
wealth
a
of
lot.
knowledge in this field that it was just like, why would I stop? why would I stop you? Like, because whatever you're telling me is gold, and whatever you're going to tell me is more gold. So just let that conversation keep going.
And I think that's such a beautiful part of it because we are not restricted to a format. As a podcast host, you get to make the decisions on length, on how you're going to be running it, who you're interviewing, and how you are then putting that out to your community to facilitate that growth in that conversation. And you
Oh
do
yeah.
it so beautifully by
Oh,
pulling
thank you.
in incredible guests for your conversations. You're knowledgeable about them, you understand who you're talking to and who you're speaking to through the podcast. And so you can facilitate really good community conversation through the podcast episodes that you have that you can then
Hmm.
dictate. They're 20 minutes, they're 30 minutes, they're an hour, they're a little bit longer, they're
Yeah.
a little bit shorter, there's some bonus content in there, and that's
Hmm.
entirely up to you episode to episode.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
if you're jumping in and joining us live and you have questions for George, now is the time. George is a longtime professional podcaster. I've been on his show many times, and it is one of the best experiences I have had as a guest because he always has such good, valuable questions, listens to what I'm saying, and then asks questions based off that to continue the conversation to make sure
Hmm.
it feels very natural, very conversational, and he's very, very good at getting guests on his show as well. So now's the time to drop those questions. We're going to be watching those
Hmm.
as we are going through today's episode. And George, I want to talk a little bit about those initial steps and some of the challenges that you faced while you were
Yes.
podcasting. So, when you
Sure.
were, especially in the beginning, what were some of those roadblocks that you came up against and how did you get around them?
It was really just a feeling of kind of getting over my own anxiety about hosting my own show. And I've been like call-in guests for shows that were on Block Talk Radio, which is live. I've been a part of a roundtable, like I said before. That's really kind of what got me into this wonderful world of podcasting, really, by being a part of Right Pack Radio. It was basically just a matter of kind of getting over um, any sort of fear of kind of going blank on a question. And it just felt like when I did my initial 3 episodes, I had that in the back of my mind, but at the same time, I didn't feel it coming while I was doing it.
Uh-huh.
So that was just like, okay, I'm better at this than I think I am. So, and I need to just kind of like allow this conversation to kind of unfold. And when I did that, it just felt like everything was natural. And the great thing about what I'm doing right now, like with the podcasting, like I said, it's been over almost 260 episodes. I still get that feeling right before of like, what if I go blank? What if I do this? What if I do that? And that's when I know that I still love this. That's when I know that I still care about this because I'm always thinking of just like, I need to make sure that I'm giving my listeners something that's worth listening to. And if I feel bored by it, if I feel like we can just go and go through with this, if I would ever feel like that, then I would know that it's at least time to step away for a little bit.
Mhm.
I can't see myself ever saying, "Okay, I'm done with podcasting." I can't see that at all. I'm having way too much fun with it. I love it, and I've invested so much in it. Invested so much of my time, my energy, and really just like I feel like I've even though I'm not hitting like the sort of Joe Rogan numbers that people are always kind of thinking that like, oh, as soon as I hit record on Anchor, that's what I'm going to wind up getting. Which I should correct myself really quickly. Anchor is now Spotify for podcasters,
Yeah.
but but at the same time, it's just like at the end of the day, you got to have fun doing this. This is a fun format, and it's something that you can really enjoy doing if it's something that you're passionate about. If it's something that you're passionate about talking about, then you can really take it and run with it.
That is a very good point. I like to kind of have some notes when I'm going into my episodes, but I like to let
Mm-hmm.
it go where it goes. So if I come up
Yep.
against that wall, I'll have a little note there with something I can ask them about. And sometimes I get to those notes, sometimes I don't because the conversation is so good. So if you
Yep.
have that fear where you're maybe not certain you have enough content to get through, take some notes, write them down. If you're using Be Live to record, you can actually put them in your agenda and you can have them right there on screen so that you can rely on that should you need it. But the more you
Mm-hmm.
do it, the better you're going to get at just being able to ask those questions without needing those notes. So
Yeah.
if you have questions, if you're watching us live, go ahead and drop those questions down below. George is here to answer them. Lala actually had a really good question. It's one I think all of us have faced at some point. She wants
Okay.
to know, how do you overcome hating your own voice? So if you don't like the sound of yourself speaking,
Mm.
if you don't love hearing yourself on video and podcast, what do you do about that, George?
It's something you got to get used to. You have to get over that. It's something that there are times when I still feel like I just sound like garbage, but then
Yeah.
there are other times when it's just like, at some point you have to listen to what other people are saying when they're saying the right things.
Mhm.
I don't want to, like, not completely depend on what other people are saying. But if you're going like, oh God, I sound like crap, and there are people around you that are complimenting your voice, that are telling you why it works, telling you what they really enjoy about it, you got to listen to them, and
Mhm.
you got to think like, oh, okay, that they must know what they're talking about. Um, so that's kind of what I did. It was a combination of that and the voice lessons that I took back in 2015, because in 2015 I had lost my admin job, and I wanted to know like what I was going to do next with myself, and that's when I came across the amazing documentary called I Know That Voice. And that's the documentary the voiceover artist John DiMaggio made, that pulls the curtain back in the animation world, and it introduces you to all these amazing voice actors. And so that was always something that I was interested in anyway. I loved radio, I still do. I love animation, still do. And I've always been fascinated with the voices, and I've always wanted to do something like that. And so I looked up, I looked up Clayton Studios. I actually found them on Twitter, and I just reached out on Twitter and I said, does anyone know of any voiceover producers that are in the St. Louis area that that can teach voiceover? And someone said Clayton Studios, and I looked them up. I found out how much their class costs, and I built up through Kickstarter a campaign to raise money for those lessons. And enough people, gave me the money for that, and gave me the means to pursue this. So that to me was a beautiful thing. So that when something like that happens, when enough people are investing in you, then you really have to listen and say like, okay, like maybe this is just my own psyche trying to mess with me, but you have to get over that at some point.
And I think that's such a beautiful thought too, especially because at the beginning of our careers, we are going to be here with very limited resources. We are not going to have access to all the same fancy equipment. We're not going to
Mhm.
have access to money for lessons. We're not going to have access to a lot of those things. So, as a beginner, how did you manage to start and scale your podcast with having those limited resources, especially in a cost effective way?
Really, it was a matter of just kind of looking at seeing what was around me. I already had the microphone because I had started doing audiobooks. I had the laptop, so I knew that I was going to use that for my editing. I already had a voiceover studio because my father-in-law had built one downstairs for me, and so there were the things that I had were there. When I realized the direction that I wanted to go in, um, I went simple. I went with Zoom for my interviews, and I just did everything remotely through there. And it was a wonderful experience, really kind of starting up with that. Um, and then like as things have gone on, I mean, I've been using the same laptop, the same microphone in a new house right now, but because I'm in a new place, that I was able to claim a walk-in closet in a bedroom that became my office, and that became my recording studio. So it is lined from top to bottom with acoustic foam. I have a mic shield for to really give it that additional oomph. I do all my audiobooks in there. I do all my podcasting in there, and it's a wonderful experience. Now, in 2019, I took the plunge on what is called the National Podcast Post Month Challenge, and that's every November. It goes alongside with National Novel Writing Month, where you're doing a 50,000 word draft of a novel. I always have to emphasize that draft of a novel in just 30 days. God help the person who actually hits publish on December 1st. But but with the National Podcast Post Month Challenge, you're recording, editing, and posting an episode of a podcast, 10 minutes or longer, for every day for 30 days. And at the end of November, you have 30 episodes of a podcast. And I decided to do one that was based on the Marvel movies that were not part of the MCU. So I called it From Duck Till Dark Outside the Marvel Studios. And it was so much fun. But in 2019, when I did it originally, I did it through the Anchor app. And they always, which is now again Spotify for podcasters, and I know that that the main thing that they really push is like, oh, use our app, record directly into it, and then you can use your phone, and boom, you got yourself a podcast. Yeah, you'll have yourself a podcast, but the quality of it is awful. So you got to make sure that you have like a decent microphone to work with, and then from there you can go ahead and do your editing. And if you still want to use Spotify for podcasters to post your episodes, fine, go ahead and do that. Via con Dios. But when it comes to the quality, the audio quality, do not use the app, because you want to make sure that you're using something that that is pleasant for your listener. Because if you don't, if you have something that just sounds really rough, then there are millions of other podcasters out there. So they can very easily just switch you off and go to something else.
That is so true. The message to reach your audience and then the ability for them to comfortably listen to you is going to
Yeah,
make or break your success. So even if you're
absolutely.
brand new and you're just starting out, you've got lower quality things, you can build yourself up to having higher quality microphones and access to other equipment. As long as you are creating a clear, easily understood podcast, you're going to have a good foundation for what you are doing to reach your audience and then to grow your audience. And speaking of audiences, we do have to talk about our audiences. So let's
Mm-hmm.
talk a little bit about how to engage with your audience. How are you building up an audience? And then how are you retaining that listener base?
For me, and this is something that I have to say to anyone who wants to be a podcaster: make sure that it's a topic that you're passionate about. They say that if you can talk about a topic for 100 episodes,
Mhm.
then you're on your way. And that is something that I really take to heart, because in addition to podcasting, I'm also an author. And I know that there are a lot of other authors that are out there that are trying to make their way in there, trying to get their spot, get their moment and everything to really shine. And if I can provide that for other authors, then I can not only open the door for that kind of audience, for other authors who can take to heart what that author is going through, then why not open it up to more creatives? Because there are other people that are doing their own creative outlets. So why not reach out to why not try to connect with them as well? So if that's one of the things that I always do with my descriptions for my episode titles,
Mhm.
I make a point to say like what it is that person does, so that way they know right away if that's something that they are passionate about as well, then they can go ahead and click on that episode and enjoy it.
That makes a lot of sense. And having that description there is incredibly helpful for your SEO, for people being able to find you, but people being able to understand what they're getting into. A
Mm-hmm.
podcast is a little bit more of a commitment than sitting down and listening to a TikTok that's only a few seconds long. A
Yeah.
podcast, you actually have to dedicate some time to. And so, in order to really feel comfortable as a listener sitting down and listening for any length of time, knowing what you're getting yourself into, and having that foundation of a host that you know and trust and enjoy being around that brings on quality guests is incredibly important to that
Mm-hmm.
success and to that growth. So, talk to me a little bit about how you are developing your content so that it resonates with your audience. You've got really good guests, you've got
Thank
really
you.
good background, and you have a really good layout and format for your show. So, what do you do to
Mhm.
develop that?
It's really just time and effort. It's figuring out like what works, what doesn't. My format is very simple. I take about 3 minutes or so to start the show, and a lot, some of it is the basic elements of welcome back. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining me for over this amount of episodes. We're part of the Once Upon a Podcast network, and so happy to have you here. Just basically, just really kind of making people, this is the time for people to just kind of sit down, get themselves comfortable and everything. And then I'll take a few minutes and talk about the guests themselves. And the great thing about that, and that's something that I truly recommend that other podcasters do, if you're going to have a guest, I understand this format, like how you asked me to introduce myself. We're live, this is one of those things where you just want to you want to jump in, you want to make sure that you get everything right, you want to make sure that the guest is pushing what they want to push. I totally get that. But when you're recording, when you're sitting down, you're recording,
Yeah.
you've reached out to your guest, you've invited them on, they say okay, and the first thing you say is tell me about yourself. I find that off-putting because for me it's just like, okay, you invited me on your show, so that means you have done some research, you know about who I am, correct? Why not go ahead and just like give a little introduction that not only takes the pressure off of them to talk about themselves, but it also kind of breaks the ice a little bit because whatever you have to say, it's likely going to resonate with them. And so 9 out of 10 times, whenever I give an intro, they always make a point to say thank you for that great intro. So they're comfortable, they're
Mhm.
having fun. So like why not just go ahead and do that? Why not go ahead and start on the in the best possible way by making your guest comfortable, making them happy that you've done your research, that you've listened, that you know who they are, and that you can freely talk a little bit more about what it is that they do. They say a lot of times when you're doing a film series, part one is always, it's always like kind of the easy part and everything because it's the intro. You're introducing your characters, you're establishing them and everything. But then part two, you don't have to worry about that. You can jump right in and tell the story you really want to tell and really open things up. That's the way I like to start with mine. I want to use my first few minutes as my part one of a series. And then part two, we've already gotten past the intro. Let's really open things up and see where we go.
And it's so important as the podcast host to be able to really tell your audience why it's valuable to listen to that specific episode.
Oh, yeah.
With podcasting being such a longer format medium to be speaking to people, you have a lot of time, a lot of space at the beginning to really let your audience know, hey, I'm your trusted source. This is why you should be listening to this episode. This is what you're going to get out of it. And so
Mm-hmm.
podcasting is a very different format than live streaming, is a very different format than some of the other social platforms where you're putting out content.
Mm-hmm.
So understanding the
Absolutely.
medium, understanding what podcasting is incredibly important for jumping in as well. And when you do know how to navigate the world of publishing and publishing a podcast really, really well, you
Mm-hmm.
are then going to be able to scale that. You are going to be able to grow that and you're going to be able to monetize it, which is why I bet a lot of you are here today. So let's talk a little bit about monetization in terms of podcasts, George. What does that look
Okay.
like for podcasters?
Really, it's a lot of things. Like one of the main things would be sponsorships, which is people basically that have decided to put in some money, invest some money and everything in your show, and you're paying them back by producing an ad that would go either at the beginning of the show, the middle of the show, at the end of the show, whatever. Usually they're about 30 seconds long. Sometimes they're up to a minute, and in some cases, with some podcast platforms, they already have like ready-made commercials that they just kind of drop in, which I personally prefer the podcaster to have more control over everything, so that way it doesn't feel like say something on Freebie, where all of a sudden like they're cutting you off mid sentence so that they can do 2 minutes about like about an insurance commercial.
Mm-hmm.
So or so in some cases, someone can basically do like can sponsor all like basically just say like sponsoring a show for a time being, and you can even just kind of just say that do like a little ad right at the very beginning, and then you can say this episode has been brought to you by this person or whatever, and you can also put their information and everything on your social media platforms. So there are different ways about going about this. Like in other cases, there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that people would go ahead and put up on Patreon. So they would have say like if you pay like $5 and everything, you'll not only get the episode early, like you'll get like a very rough version of the episode early, but you'll also get video. You can get you can get like little extra goodies. You can ask a question, to the guest that's coming up. Different things like that, and you can really have fun with that sort of crowdsource financing kind of platform. And one of the things that I feel I should mention, because I'm currently using Captivate. I've been using them since 2021 now, and they're fabulous. That's a definite platform that I would highly recommend to people, especially if you're going to be a part of a podcast network. You definitely want to be involved with Captivate. They're fantastic, and they're not paying me to say that, so maybe they should. I don't know, but they're terrific, and they have recently put together a membership platform, so that way you can do a Patreon style campaign using their means, and it's for no extra charge. So the different tools that they provide for you is so the amount of tools is so massive that like I barely scratched the surface of what I can really do with this show. And I've been on that platform for over 2 years now.
Yeah.
So there are different ways, like you can do crowdsource, you can do sponsorships, you can do memberships. There are a lot of different ways that you can really monetize this, and really just as long as you're having fun, then go for it.
I love that. And I love that as you have grown, you've learned more things that you can be using, more things you can be leveraging, but you're still just scratching the surface of what we have available to podcasters right now. So
Oh yeah.
whether we are filming in a live stream capacity where your audience is able to join you live for the podcast recordings, or you're recording them behind the scenes and then putting that audio out for people to see, you have so many tools and resources that you can access through different programs, through different memberships and subscriptions, things that you just have around the house or already have access to, so that you can grow yourself and scale yourself as you learn more, understand more, and build up your audience. So George,
Mhm.
as we're wrapping up today, I want to know, what is your top 3 pieces of advice for people who are just jumping into the podcast space?
Okay, if you are looking for a guest, do not put it out publicly on social media. Do not tag that person and say, like, hey, would you like to be a guest on my show? Because they're not always going to be the first ones to see it. And they're going to wind up being maybe even pressured by other people that are going to want to do that. They need to do it on their own time. So if you want to reach out to someone who's not in your own inner circle, reach out to them other means. If you have a connection with them on Facebook, reach out to them that way. But first, take a look at their own website, and if they have a section that says contact, use that, and be as professional as humanly possible when you do that. Talk about your show, and when you do, like when you do, because they're it's a safe bet they're not going to know about your show's existence. So introduce them to it, provide them with a link, and let them know some specific dates that you already have in mind, because that will really get their attention. If you just leave a blanket time frame, they're not going to follow. They're not going to respond, and it's not going to happen. So go in there knowing exactly what you want to do and have fun doing it.
That is a very good point. Making sure that we have personalized how we're reaching out and how we're engaging
Hmm.
with the people that could potentially be our guests on the show is
Hmm.
incredibly important for us to get those people on our shows, to make
Right.
sure that we are facilitating really good conversation with a lot of really great people. So,
Hmm.
George, you've had a ton of experience. What is one big thing you've learned as a podcaster?
One big thing I've learned as a podcaster is that you have to enjoy what it is you're doing. You have to know that this is a topic that you can talk about for a lengthy period of time, and you have to enjoy it. You have to have fun with it. This is, as I always say, this is a fun platform, and um, and more than anything, this is not the time to have it as like a free flowing talk about anything you want, kind of podcast. It's not that time anymore. Maybe that would have worked about, like 15 years ago um, when the podcast format was still kind of, growing. But
Right.
now there are, quite a few million shows that are out there right now. And that number increased exponentially when COVID hit, when people were just kind of looking around for any sort of real interaction with people. So definitely know what it is that you're going to say. Know your topic and stick to it. And by, you do that and you're going to find your audience.
Very good point. All right, as we are wrapping up today, if you have any final questions, go ahead and drop those down below for us. We're going to be monitoring those the next couple of days and weeks. We're going to get answers from George. And as always, you can reach out to George on his social media. You can go listen to his podcast. You can check out his website. So, George, where are the best places for people to reach you?
The latest place that you can really reach me is Threads. That is a wonderful community for writers, for podcasters, for creatives of all kinds. You definitely want to be on there. There's a real good supportive community there. Um, and you can also find me on Instagram. My handle is simple. It's George Sirois, Sirois. You can find me on Facebook. You cannot find me on Twitter. Like that is, I've left that place behind a while ago. And you can also find me occasionally on TikTok. I'm still like trying to get my regular feed, like kind of caught up over there. And you can also find me on the Clubhouse app, and you can all find me there, like under the same handle.
And if you have further questions about developing your podcast or about how you can be recording face to face with your audience live and engaged while you're streaming, or recording off air and then putting your audio out to the world, we would love to hear from them. Go ahead and let us know in our comments down below, and stay tuned as we have continual episodes here on Be Live to help you navigate the world of your live streaming so that this can be your most profitable year ever and the most fun that you've had while you're engaging with your audience. We will see you in our next episode. Until then, everyone, have a great day.
Bye bye.